If you know there's power in the name of Jesus, somebody shout that name.
Okay, hey everybody, YouTube, Facebook, we're live, and I have with me tonight John Euler, who many of you may recognize the name from the Christian Post article that where he emphatically stated that Drag Queen Story Hour is the greatest grooming program ever devised. And I asked John to come on tonight to have a chat, and I'm not going to give his bio, I'm not going to give his resume, I'll let him do that. But I just want to wait for a couple of you to jump on here because I don't want you to miss who he is and why he's on tonight and what he wants to share with you. But I want to say first and foremost, you'll look at the two boxes we're on. You'll see above John there, you'll see his website, survivorsupport.net. Make sure you bookmark that site. And then underneath his name there, John Euler, you'll see underneath he has churchprotect.org. They're two sites, but they're basically the different sides of the same coin. One is going to help churches learn how to spot a predator, and the other one is basically to help survivors of predators. Did I get that right, John?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so with that said, you guys, we got some people jumping on here. So, John, I'm going to let you go ahead and tell everybody who you are.
Well, Richard, thank you, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you. You and I connected through a kind of interesting set of circumstances online. And that'll be pertinent to a part of what we'll talk about, what's happening these days and how things are not what we all assumed, honestly. But as you and I have gotten to know one another, you were kind enough to invite me on, so I'm very appreciative of that. I will be starting a podcast soon, hopefully by about next week. You're technologically light years ahead of me.
Not really. This is pretty easy. I can show you do this in 10 minutes.
There you go. But in brief, I'm head of survivorsupport.net. We're a small ministry, but hopefully effective. That is really born out of my concern for survivors, primarily survivors of sexual abuse, but there's all sorts of different types of abuse, of course. They have a lot of similarities, but the more severe kinds of abuse, the greater the damage. My background, once upon a time, I was heading into vocational ministry. Wanted to fly for the Marines, ended up with glasses, so I couldn't do that, but the Lord changed things. So I was very steeped in ministry, was heading toward that vocationally, and then learned about professional licensure. And I thought, you know what, I probably want as many opportunities available to me. So I changed, graduated from Cal State Fullerton. I was at Talbot School of Theology, graduated from Biola. And from there, did a lot of outpatient, of course, and inpatient. That's when I learned about trauma. All through schooling, all through even a Bible school in Sacramento, Epic School of the Bible. I didn't have any courses, there was no information given to me, even through Cal State Fullerton, and we had excellent instructors. It was heavily Adlerian for those that are familiar with counseling theories. But we didn't have any information, any courses on the effects of severe abuse, what I call trauma-based disorders. If the church is the first line of defense, which it is, where anybody who has been hurt and has deep wounds, that's virtually all of us, pastors are going to be the ones, houses of worship, faith-based communities, those are going to be the first place people turn. But unfortunately, that is the majority of pastors, and it's not their fault per se, just are not well equipped. We're not taught. I was not taught going through that. So I learned the hard way. I didn't know there was a whole body of research out there. So my introduction was working inpatient when I started to see things that I'd never seen before, in the sense of people that were deeply wounded from abuse, and when that starts to surface. And of course, I had my own theology, and now I'm trying to mesh all that. I think I've come to a very sound place, but it would have been nice if I had had some context to really understand how to help people. I think I was still extremely helpful, but now that I know what I know, found myself also working extensively in eating disorders. My master's thesis was looking at the family dynamics of emotional eaters, and that led into eating disorders, and then sexual abuse survivors. Then worked with kids in the system, what's called severely emotionally disturbed. So I was worked at group homes and also residential treatment. Then had an opportunity to start an affiliate program for one of the EAP, largest EAP programs, employee assistance programs, and then was recruited by one of the Department of Children and Family Services to serve as their acting director. Richard, you didn't know that.
I did not know that, but that's right. I won't hold that against you.
You won't, and how valuable was that? Because I ended up also being a homeschooling dad.
Huh.
So was able to see from the inside out. That was in Cambria County in Pennsylvania, one of the mid-sized counties, but it was short-lived. The heir apparent in civil service firms chose to come back. So ended up then starting a teen adolescent group home, a 12-bed group home. Was doing that for a couple of years, and then the Department of Corrections out in Pennsylvania. That's not my background, but they made me an offer too good to be true. I figured I had a background dealing with adolescents. How much different? That was the best training, quite frankly. But I didn't realize it was to start, or as I was getting underway, I knew what my task was, but I didn't realize it was really starting the nation's first intensive treatment program in a long-term solitary confinement. So the Hannibal Lecters of the world, and those became my clientele. Did that for 6 solid years, and then there was a change in administration, and there were some issues that eventually resulted in me having to be the first whistleblower in the nation about inmate abuse. So that was unique in and of itself. A lot of people will say, as a matter of fact, Richard, what you do, what I do, they'll throw out terms. They'll say, you're homophobic, you're transphobic. Well, I get to tell those people something, that I was the only person, now a couple psych staff with myself. I'm actually going to be doing a podcast with Mary Lou Seamuth. Okay. But I was the one to stand up for and protect a trans inmate that was on the receiving end of abuse. As a matter of fact, I had more trans inmates.
Let me get this straight. You're a Christian, a counselor, who didn't want a transgender, even though you don't agree with that lifestyle.
Correct.
You didn't want him or her, I don't know what their biological is because he's a transgender.
No,
you didn't want them to be abused or physically harmed in any way, shape, or form.
That's right.
So that kind of blows that whole "you're a hateful bigot who wants to harm, LGBT folks" right out the window, doesn't it?
That's right. As a matter of fact, and Ken Herdman, he's recently retired from the DOC. He and I rode together to SCI Somerset for a couple of years. And Ken used to give me a bad time because I actually want to listen to inmates. I always want to believe there's hope, right, at the time that I was working there. And I think he would also concur. I was probably the only one that was willing to listen. And so I ended up having a lot of trans on my caseload. And that was very interesting because they knew the number one thing they always knew, and I would always hear from them, is I treated them with respect. So when you and I, Richard, as we are on the receiving end of stuff, and that's how we ended up meeting, the one thing that will constantly be thrown up, quite frankly, by predator apologists, what I call them, which are actually co-conspirators.
You should coin that term right now. Hear that, guys watching this? Predator apologists.
There you go. That's a Euler.
Predator apologists. That's a new term coined.
Yeah, right. That's why we use it. Apologetics. It doesn't mean to apologize saying you're sorry. It means to give a reasoned, rational defense for something. Give an explanation. So a predator apologist, in my how I'm using that, is someone on social media, may be alive if they ever show their face, but they tend to run their mouths a lot on social media because they're anonymous, and that's another key. I have red flag indicators. So if anybody's on social media defending any alternative lifestyles and they're anonymous, there's a reason why they're anonymous. And they'll, of course, say, oh, they have to protect themselves. That's garbage. Now, you know what? I've been threatened to have my house firebombed and stuff, but my bio is right out there. You know, Richard, you too, right? No, if
You know,
you're hiding,
I don't hide anything. Words for Christ. Everybody knows who I am. But you know that I just want to pause for a second. And you said, you know, because one of the things that a lot of these atheists, a lot of these LGBT folks on social media do is they do have fake profiles, and almost unanimously, it's always like, oh, because I want to protect my identity or what have you. And I just want to, you know, and I'll throw this out there real quick, and I'll let you finish and we can go on from there. But isn't it funny that those people do that the same way that drag queens who are dressing in hypersexualized female clothing use different names, and then when we find out what their real names are, it turns out that a lot of them have very, very shady backgrounds as far as pedophiles, actual convicted pedophiles, sex workers, and they're undersuited in names, fake names. And we see that on social media too. And you're a counselor. I want people to remember this. You're a counselor. You're a licensed counselor. So if anybody has the ability and the knowledge to speak about this, it is you. And what you're saying is that a lot of these folks, not all of course, but a lot of them probably have things that they don't want you to find out about, which is why they're anonymous. Am I reading that correctly?
You're 100% correct. There's going to be two people, unless you work for the NSA, FBI, or whatever. Then you're not going to be on social media anyways. If you are, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
So there's only three kinds of people, three categories in my estimation. They're going to hide their identity. One is a spy or NSA, you know, for a reason, but they're not going to be foolish enough. They're not going to toy around on social media. So
right.
Okay. If you're hiding your identity, you got one of two reasons, and it's really easy to ferret out and discern it, because what you do is you go on to that person's social media and they'll say, oh, you're trolling, excuse me, then don't be on social media. And it's funny, they can go on ours, but the moment we simply check theirs out, oh, we're
stalking them.
There it is. We're stalking them. Really? No, I don't think so. You have a page for a reason. And so the bottom line is this: a survivor, there are a number of survivors, and quite a few of them, and I can absolutely appreciate those, that are very nervous, and they have very good reason to be. Okay. How can you discern the difference between a survivor and a predator? There's a lot of red flags, but for those who are trained, those of us that are trained, and in time, and we'll even talk about that, Richard, because we're going to, Survivor Support is going to start a training program at some point in time, maybe sooner rather than later.
Make a note of that, you guys. He's going to start a training program, because John and I have talked several times this week. And one of the things that we both agree, and I think most of you watching this, and just so you know, John, I know your wife is watching this channel, but this video is syndicated across 3 different Facebook pages, 3 different Facebook groups, and 3 different YouTube channels as well. So there's a lot of people that are going to be watching, and you know, I mean, I'm already getting comments here. They call themselves MAPS, minor attracted persons, rebranding. Is anyone going to ask why he's wearing a paper towel? All right, you know what? Go ahead and ask that. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I'll let you answer that.
Didn't I? I didn't. Okay, sorry, but yeah, paper towel. Skin cancer. My public service announcement for everybody: if you notice anything, I had no clue. As a matter of fact, it's just over my glasses, and you know, it was painless. And you know, I've got spots from the sun, but I went to have it checked out, and I almost forgot about that. The doctor looked. We better look at that one. It's really gross. So you're lucky I'm wearing this thing. So it's healing. My poor wife, bless her heart, she's having to look at that thing. But skin cancer. So everybody, be very careful. If you notice something, go get it checked out. I didn't know anything about skin cancer. I do now. So that's all.
That's it. Nothing nefarious. I know. I mean, and I just want to say something, John, because you and I talk a lot about Christianity, and especially, you know, but, you know, and I just want to stop because, I mean, I know you don't know what I do too often, but, you know, one of the things I want to ask is, you know, somebody made the comment here, and they said, is anyone going to ask why you're wearing that? Are we just going to ignore that? Yeah, actually, we could have ignored that because who cares? You know, why Christians, you know, this is one thing that does bother me about the Christian community is we literally, I mean, it's amazing to me that we call ourselves Christians, and those are the kind of things that we nitpick about. That, you know, and I did a video the other day, John, about, you know, how Christians, we can't get anything done because we're literally arguing over things like whether angels have wings, over what Bible translations we read, and then stuff like that. I mean, people don't understand that we're on YouTube, Facebook, things like that. The public can see what we're doing. And you have a group of people, and I know you're going to get into this, but we have a group of people out there that are sexualizing children, that are out there pushing an agenda, and we're more worried about a paper towel on your head versus what you're talking about here tonight. That's what the church has become today.
or somebody antagonistic. And it's very simple. I simply say this: would you wear this if you knew you were going to go live?
Well, exactly. That's my point. Is as Christians, this is the stuff we talk about. We're worried about everything else other than what we should be worried about.
That's right. What we're talking about right now, the ultimate topic, and I guess that was a long way of saying about my background.
No, it's good. I want people to know who you are. I want them to know why you're qualified to speak on this issue of predators. Drag Queen Story Hour. You were in Christian Post. You had a couple other people quote you. But why is it that you? Okay, look, I'm a Christian. I'm a minister. I say it all the time. But nobody's surprised and nobody reacts. Hey, look at this. This guy. You don't hear articles saying Christian says Drag Queen Story Hour. Right. But the headline was Counselor says. So what qualifies you? And as I said, what qualifies you to talk about? That's why I wanted your background to be new. You were qualified. You did. You spoke to. And I'll let you tell these numbers. How many predators? How many? So go ahead.
So I was in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections for a little over 11 years, from 2005 to 2016. During that time, started the nation's first intensive treatment program in long-term solitary confinement, then transitioned to heading up one of the two at the time. The Pennsylvania Department of Corrections has one now, what they call high-intensity sex offender unit. That's where all the high-intensity, those that are evaluated to be high-intensity based upon offense and risk level, and then sexually violent predators. So the worst of the worst, by degree, get sent there. 65-bed unit. It was a great opportunity. That's when I also was immersed in what I consider to be huge deficiencies in sex offender treatment, because it's cognitive behavioral based. I added, I didn't change the program, I just made it more robust. Some folks didn't appreciate that, but there was a whole lot of downtime. So a lot of the charts that I have on survivorsupport.net and churchprotect.org come from me working with the inmates. They aren't inmate related per se, but it gave me freedom, because there's not a lot of people within a bureaucracy, and this is part of what makes me unique, I guess. I'm working in an intensive environment. I have keys, meaning this, on psychology staff. So I was a staff member in two different prisons. So as a psychology staff member, we can have access to virtually everything except for ammunition. Meaning I can actually go, and my treatment program was in long-term solitary confinement. Not any employee can walk into, even within the prison. So not just anybody can go into a prison, and then among staff, not just anybody can go into the restricted housing unit or segregation units or solitary. I then had the ability, if the officers cooperate, but I had the ability to walk in at any point in time and ask to get an inmate out. No researcher has that ability. I was the only site staff that had a full-size classroom-sized whiteboard in my office, because having come from the street, as they call it, my background was not forensics. My background was not criminal science. My background was working with people and with survivors. So when I was recruited by the DOC, I was bringing that mindset to, meaning treatment. I always want to believe there's hope, but I also had steeped myself in working with survivors. And so now I'm working with those that had hurt survivors. So not only did I have to deal with my own emotions and rage, because unique stuff comes up when you realize you're within arm's reach, or you're shoulder to shoulder with guys that have harmed people, the victims will be suffering for a lifetime. That's very intense. Okay, and now I'm
children, women, other men,
everything. All the bad people go to prison. Now I use that loosely, but when you think in terms of everybody that gets busted for a sex offense, guess where they go? They go to prison. So who works with them?
Right.
So I was working intensively within solitary, really bad people there. Then working in the sex offender unit, I did the evaluations, I did sex offender assessments, I did parole evaluations. That's how I was selected. My parole reports were so effective. As a matter of fact, my claim to fame for me is I've kept 19 heinous sex offenders, child sex offenders, that were due to be released. They were good to go. And because I was able to work it with some of the institutional parole agents, I was able to write reports after, not vindictive ones, but my assessment is these guys are dangerous. They shouldn't be on the street. And so I personally kept in 19 at last count, I think. Heinous guys that were good to go, they were getting out, but my reports stopped them. So my reports became very appreciated by the parole board. And so I was offered a wonderful opportunity. The Department of Corrections, Pennsylvania, was going to fly in Robert Hare of the Hare Psychopathy Checklist, the godfather of psychopathy, as they call him. You can imagine that costs like $1 bazillion. So they fly him in. There's a select group of us, and the training took 2 days. It's intensive. So you had to have been invited, at least as far as our little group. So I was one of the few selected because at that time, the Pennsylvania DOC was going to be doing commitments, civil commitments. Guys are going to get out in the community. Somebody needed to evaluate them. I was going to be one of those few psychology staff. So from that, I'm certified in PCLR and doing regular sex offender treatment as well, and then dual diagnosis and other things, and in charge of the mental health unit as far as the special needs unit. So, I did everything under the sun, but I became very steeped in and specialized in studying sex offenders in this way.
And that's the key why we're on here tonight, because like I said, you were recently quoted in the Christian Post as saying, and I'll have you say it because I think it's a brilliant line. I think it's 150% accurate. What did you say about Drag Queen Story Hour?
Well, it's the greatest grooming opportunity, well, I don't know, the greatest grooming opportunity for a sex offender that's ever come about.
Right, and that's kind of why I want to bring you on here, because there's a couple things I'm going to talk with you tonight. That's one. I also want to talk about what your plans are, what your websites are, what you're doing, churches, because this is something that does affect churches. Absolutely. And I want you to talk to the church, because everybody that's watching this video right now, 99% are Christian. I'm sure we have the typical trolls, and we probably have some of our haters. And John, you probably know who I'm talking about here. Probably watching because they watch everything we do more closely than some of our fans or followers, if you will. Because I think the church, we've shared images, we've shared videos, we've been out and preached these things. I mean, we've shut down, as a ministry here, we've shut down 8 of these things. We've shut down 8 Drag Queen Story Hours ourselves. We've had 2 LGBT displays removed from 2 libraries here in Tennessee. We had Lafayette, Louisiana. They wanted to try to, our PFLAG down there wanted to try to pass a resolution to make Lafayette officially like a pride city. We intervened there and got that shot down. So we do these things, and of course the narrative from the left, the narrative from the LGBT is that we're just hateful homophobes. We're trying to take people's rights away, and I want to go on record with you, John, as saying that I do not believe marriage is a constitutional right. I don't believe it's a right. I believe it's a privilege that has been given to us by our Creator God, for one man and one woman. So I do not believe that marriage is a right that the government can give or take away from us. But in doing what we do, people don't seem to understand. You're a counselor. We're doing this because, number one, is I believe that Drag Queen Story Hours, like you said, is a grooming event. We've heard drag queens say, we are grooming the next generation. We've heard them say it. You in the article had said, the church doesn't think about this. Society doesn't think of this. Why are men dressing up as hypersexualized females? Why are they dressing in underwear? Why do they want access to your children? And you being a person who's worked with 4,000 serial predators over the course of your 11 years, you have a unique insight that none of us have. And I really want you to go into it today, what the dangers are of Drag Queen Story. How can the church recognize a predator? How can we spot these men and women? And you gave one flag already. They hide their identity. But can you go into more? Because again, you have a Christian audience right now. What do you want to say to them?
Yeah. Well, let me take a step back and say my first and foremost concern, and all of this stems from my concern for survivors. So let me start there for a moment. That was my clinical background before working with predators and men in prison. The full range, dealt with every kind of person. My heart lies with survivors. Right. So going into the prison, I think both because I'm a counselor and I care about survivors, I came in with a mindset assuming that the majority of men in prison are prodigals. And that's not true, quite frankly. So I had to learn that. But I also assumed a number of things, probably both from my own perspective and then what I had been taught and what a lot of people have heard. Why? Because it's in the college textbooks. It's out as quote unquote research-based facts. And so I came into the prison believing a number of things, but I started to see things that it didn't match. For instance, I had been taught through grad school that a child offender, meaning an adult that offends a child, a pedophile, ends up recreating their own abuse. So pedophiles were abused, and they choose victims at the same age, developmentally, that that the pedophile was when he himself was abused. You pick up so much research as far as journals. You look at textbooks, that's what they're going to tell you, that pedophiles primarily are acting out abuse. Okay. Mm-hmm. I went into prison assuming that. As a matter of fact, I'm doing sex offender groups.
So, and let's pause here for a second, because that is the stereotype that most of us have heard, is that somebody who's abused will go on to be abusers themselves. All these people that are harming children, all these people that are doing these things, it's because they themselves were victimized, so they're doing nothing more than repeating the pattern of what they've learned. You thought that, we're taught that, and you even went into your, I don't know if you want to call it your ministry, your counseling, with that mindset, because that's what you had been taught, right?
That's right.
Okay.
So I'm starting groups, and it's interesting, at least in the Department of Corrections in Pennsylvania, I'm going to assume all over 50 states, they don't have sex offender groups based upon offense. It's based upon risk level after you assess them. So you can have in one group anywhere between 8 to 15 men who run the gamut. So you have everything from what we call the young and the dumb that should have been on to college, and they're still hanging out with high school, all the way to rapists, all the way to philanderers, all the way to manipulators, all the way to the dangerous kind of rapists, adult rapists that hang out in parking lots that we all, everybody's worst nightmare, or break into homes, to also the pedophiles. So you can have that in one group. And what was so unique about that is, and I still think there's pros and cons, but the one thing that was beneficial is this, and I think they do it for time's sake. But if you have a group of a wide variety of offenses, guys sitting in one group, you can watch facial expressions. Mm-hmm. And the one thing, there are two things that are true, and you always hear it in prison. There are no secrets in jail. That's very true, meaning it'll come out because there ain't no privacy. Okay, so if somebody's doing something, you're going to find out, and they snitch on each other. It's a great way to get corroborating evidence. Plus, the prison security office listens to phone calls. I had one person say, you used to listen to inmate phone calls. Excuse me? Like I had the time, and no, prisons don't work that way. It's the security office, folks.
Yeah, but even if you did, so what? I mean, isn't every phone call in jail monitored anyway?
It's all taped, but it's the security office that does that.
Oh, okay.
Ready? Fortunately, it's not my job because I don't care. I don't care what goes on the phone in this sense, that my job is to work with an inmate, and I'm going to assume now, this was part of my transition, I'm going to assume he's lying to me. Right. Now, why? Did I start out that way? No. Outpatient, regular kind of counseling in the community, it assumes that the person wants help. That's why they're paying money, except if they were drug in. I'm not going to grab this here. If they're drug in, right, they would prefer not to be there. Kids in the system don't want to be sitting in front of you. How much more do inmates view you as part of the system? So by nature, you have a situation in prison where if you're going to do research and you come in from the outside, it's not normal counseling. It's not normal research. You're dealing with men who, by degree, and especially with the pedophiles, they have to volunteer to be interviewed. Not just anybody can do it. They can't be disciplined. They can't be under official discipline. They can't be in the long-term. They can't be in solitary. Okay. So these are quote unquote good inmates. So a researcher wants to come in. They ask who wants to volunteer. So the question is this: what inmate's going to volunteer to be a part of a research project? Okay. Inmates, by degree, by and large, are always in it for themselves. They're always thinking in terms of, especially in states that have a minimum and a maximum confinement time. So a halfway in, good time, you're eligible for parole. They're always thinking about what? As a matter of fact, programming will start about at the halfway mark. Why? Because suddenly the inmate's motivated to prove your parole, right? They could have been watching TV all the way up until about their min date, and now they want to take programming.
And what's the number one thing that these people in prisons do, right? They do what they to help convince the parole board to let them out. What is the one thing? What's the one thing the parole boards love to hear about people, right? What do they love to hear about people that they've chained, whatever? What do they love to hear from these people that lets them that helps convince them let these people out of jail?
That's right. And what's important before I say it is this. If you've been an outside researcher, so if you look up any of the sex offender research, the question is, and it's so important because on churchprotect.org, if you want to find out how do you do proper research, Euler, are you published? I haven't had time yet. Well, then we're not going to, excuse me. It all comes down to the method, the concepts of what am I bringing to the table in order to do this research. And if I assume that the guy's telling me the truth, how do I know if he's lying?
Right.
And how do I know if, and the reality is this, every inmate, especially a sex offender, when he sits down to talk to you, he's thinking of two things. How is this going to play out, and how is the parole board going to listen to this? And he's practicing. So most research is inmates that are practicing, and they want to float out into the research things that will benefit them, and primarily by generating sympathy. If you found out, and here's another thing that's not even in treatment, really. If you found out that 100% of sex offenders are steeped in progressively dark porn, and we're into progressive, or you could see the progression of porn at the moment of offense when they were finally busted, or you found out that pedophiles aren't born that way, they're not genetically predisposed, they weren't, the sophisticated ones were never sexually abused themselves. What do I mean by sophisticated? If somebody can make it to adulthood, and beyond, meaning into their late teens, early 20s, early 30s, without any criminal history, without any track record of difficulties in terms of mental health, well-adjusted, he's a pastor. That's my number one concerns, even above and beyond, right? The drag queen, okay? Let me repeat that. The number one darkest type of pedophile targets churches. So that should come, hopefully, as a relief to all the alternative lifestyle people. The group
and would you agree they target churches because, as Christians, we are taught to forgive, and we should, but because of our forgiving nature and our willingness to say, hey, the Bible tells us that when Jesus Christ forgives us and washes us, God takes our sin and He throws it in the sea of forgiveness, if you will, or as far as the east from the west. So because we have this mentality, we want to forgive, we're quick to forgive, but a lot of people don't seem to understand is that, God can forgive these people, of course, like you said, there's always hope, but there's still consequences. But, I've been told by many people, and again, I'll ask you since you're the expert, is that, these people prey on churches because of our kindness and because of our forgiving nature, that we are easy to fool as a result of that, which would also go into the whole, how the church is spiritually impoverished, and the fact that we don't have discernment anymore.
That's right. So then to fast forward to, what are some of the things that
would you agree with that that's why they're targeting churches, not because of anything in the church itself, it's because of the kindness and the forgiving nature of churches, not because churches are, safe havens for pedophiles, if you will.
Correct. By the time somebody becomes a pedophile, and let me go on record as saying, here's how somebody becomes a pedophile, and you won't find this in the literature. And once I finally figured it out, so it took years. It took years for me of intensive analysis and meeting with these guys, because I was trying to connect dots. Really,
connecting the dots.
Oh, there you go. It's funny. The people that want to do the research don't have the access, because it takes a lot of effort to try to get clearance to sit down with some inmates for a couple of hours or a couple of days at best. Right. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes into it. So the people that are trying to do the research on sex offenders or pedophiles in prison, they are very limited in terms of access and what they're going to gain. The people that have complete access, so I have complete access to the inmates, to their medical records, to their psychiatric histories, to the criminal histories. Every inmate I dealt with, I had to go into the criminal history as well, psychosocial, everything. No researcher has access to that. Plus, I have all this corroborating information. I'm hearing from other inmates about them. If there's stuff in the mail that they get, I get that information. If there's stuff going on phone calls, the security office tells me that. I have absolute information that no researcher does. So that allowed me then, and then I'm with them so much, they begin to forget about me in a strange sort of way. And so, no.
And I want to, again, I don't mean to interrupt you, but
no,
again, it's important to understand that you have talked with these men and women. You've interviewed them. You got insight that not everybody would get. And you're talking about some of the worst people in our society. You're talking about pedophiles, rapists, sex offenders, violent sex offenders. So you have an insight that I can look at society as a minister, as somebody who runs a ministry, as and say, hey, I see these things at Dry Queen Story Hour. I see what these people are doing. I see the sexual kids. I see, I post pictures, I post videos. But you have the insight into who these people really are. And it's not just, oh, look at the Christians are against the LGBT. You're a counselor. You happen to be a Christian, yes, but you are a counselor. That has dealt with these people in a level that I probably will never deal with. There's no pedophile that I can say that I've ever sat down with and tried to counsel or talk to like you did. So when you speak on these issues, it isn't just because you're a homophobe or bigoted. This is stuff that you know because of your insight, because of your studies, and because of your counseling with these reprobates, if you will, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, here's the one thing that an outside researcher, and there are a lot of them out there, okay? An outside researcher, if you're going to meet with somebody, you meet in your outside office. You meet with them for how long per week? Usually once a week or so. I had hundreds of hours with different guys, just hours and hours and hours. It was unlimited. So the amount of hours, what's called clinical contact hours, runs circles. The only thing I haven't done is publish. I may do that someday, but I've published enough. You can go on, that's why churchprotect.org and Survivor Support. A lot of my stuff is on there. I do trainings.
And I have seen your certificate, by the way. You did have a certificate when somebody else called you whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Was challenging you and calling you fraud and blah, 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 blah. But I have seen your certificate. You did share that on Twitter. You did make it available for everybody to see. You don't hide anything. So if you want to check his credentials, and look, our audience is not like that, but I just want to throw that out there in case anybody does have questions. You are more than happy to share that with anybody if they really want to see it.
My life's an open book, quite frankly. So I'll share a couple of things that became clear, which then put things in perspective as far as who pedophiles are. Now, you notice I'm not saying who the gay pedophiles are, or
right.
To me, that's secondary. So am I homophobic? No, I'm not even concerned about homosexuality.
What?
Do I have my own?
You're not concerned with homosexuality?
Do I have my own thoughts about it? Do I think it's healthy? No.
Okay.
But a heterosexual guy sleeping around is not healthy either.
Correct.
You have issues. If you are sexually loose, you got issues. If you're into 50 Shades of Grey, you got huge issues. Okay?
So, somebody just asked a question. How can a woman be a predator? Have you ever dealt with a women predator? And again, I don't mean to cut you off here, but YouTube, the questions come in fast.
Yeah. I personally have not dealt with a female predator because I was dealing with male. I have my own thoughts. For instance, I have on YouTube, somebody can Google it now. I did an analysis of Allison Mack. Okay?
Yeah.
There are two types of psychopaths, by the way.
For those you don't know who Allison Mack is, she's the one with the NXIVM,
that's right.
NXIVM cult, the sex cult, where she was recruiting girls for sex for what's the guy's name?
Keith Raniere.
Keith Raniere, right? She was recruiting girls, and they would brand their initials in them. It was a sex cult.
Yeah, and Jeffrey Epstein, he has Maxwell, whatever her name is. Okay. As a matter of fact, in a lot of, what's so strange is this: for a lot of the very sophisticated pedophiles that have hundreds of victims, it's not uncommon. The more sophisticated they are, you will find that there's a woman working with the guy. And the darkest kind of person in terms of psychopathy, and I'll define that in a second, to me is the female. pedophile. There's a couple different types because I think there's a difference between male predators and female predators. Both are equally as culpable and dangerous, but there's going to be different reasons why they do what they do. Men, it's always sexual deviance, which is different than lust, but women don't lust the same way men do in this sense. Erotica is female porn.
Well, here, real quick, so let's see. Somebody says, I was abused by a female. And John, I talked to you, I was abused by a female as well. So they are out there.
Absolutely. But there's some qualitative differences. That's all I'm saying. That's why there's not as many of them. Okay, but when you find one, they're really dark. But what you will also find is, well, that'll be for another program. I'll be able to describe some of the dynamics.
No, this won't be the last time we have you on. I think your insight is and is important, especially since our culture is, well, it's going down this slippery slope of moral decay, and it's not getting better. Like I said, I've talked to you, and I told you I've been to many of these Pride events. I've been to these drag queen story hours, and the first one I went to, it was literally it was just dressed up. I mean, they're introducing BDSM now. This puppy play nonsense. They're actually running around. I mean, it is inappropriate. And the LGBT groups are saying, well, is it inappropriate for a man on a public beach to walk around in a Speedo? And my answer is, yeah, it absolutely is inappropriate. Just as it's same to me, it's inappropriate for a woman to walk around with a piece of string up her butt. That's inappropriate. That's not something that children or even as a married man I want to see.
That's right. Let me mention two things. First is what I noticed that debunked certain things when I figured it out. It took years because again I was steeped in what I had been taught, and then also coming from a counseling perspective where you want to believe there's hope, and I always want to believe there's hope. But I figured two things out, and tell you what, it is absolutely true. And certain researchers hate the fact that I figured this out. Okay. I continued to hear time and time again from the inmates, but primarily the pedophiles. The pedophiles were steeped, they had catchphrases. They were much more psychologically sophisticated than the average guy. And so that became clear. The average sex offender, if you want to put it that way, they're not sophisticated. They haven't done research. They haven't looked at, they don't have terms.
Right.
So the question is, what's up with that? So if you have a guy that's really steeped into trying to defend pedophiles, trust me, that's not normal. And that's one of the things to always keep in mind. If a guy doesn't act normal, okay, we use that in quotes, but if it's way outside the norm, there's probably a reason why. So I discovered as I began to listen to and delved into how they were abused, I started to ask them about their own abuse. And the one thing a liar, somebody that's faking abuse, do people do that? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. The one thing someone that's faking abuse can't do is conduct themselves like a genuine survivor. They have no intuitive sense. They've memorized little factoids, but when you begin to delve into that, you will see a vast difference between someone that's lying through their teeth versus a genuine survivor. Those of us that have worked with survivors, it's very clear when you meet one. It's perfectly clear, and there's all sorts of indicators. Yeah. Somebody that fakes it has no intuitive sense of what a trauma victim has gone through, so they lie through their teeth because it's all intellectual. And Dr. Hare, when he studied psychopaths, what's so interesting about this, and there's two types of psychopaths. It's not just a guy with the knife, the crazy guy. That's called a bloody psychopath. Robert Hare came up with the term.
So John, somebody with a just want to let you know, with a fake ID says, forgiving nature in quotes, pedophiles are victims of molestation in quotes. I get all their personal info in quotes. They, in quote, are dark. He's a scrub. I'd like to know how Uller has access to all, in all caps, prisoner personal info. And the name on this account is Hugh, Hugh, man.
Okay, so I'm going to answer this. I'm aware of the time. Ready?
No. Listen. My audience is used to me being on for 2 hours. It's perfectly fine. You can stay on as long as you want.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Hugh, I'm going to respond to you and your little ilk. Okay. So if you're jaded, I ain't going to be.
But remember what John said earlier. People who anonymize their names, who are afraid to use their real names. Okay, and I'm not talking like. All right, let me just clarify before you jump in there. There are people here, like for instance, we have somebody whose name is Blue Soul Jim. Okay, yeah. But he talks to us. That's just here, but he doesn't. He has no problem saying who he is if we asked him. very different than the typical troll. So
And as a matter of fact, Hugh, I appreciate you pointing something out. This is very important. What's one of the first red flags that you look for between a legitimate person versus, Hugh, a fraud? Now, Hugh, let me share with you how I know you are a fraud because of this. Nothing personal. You make a good fraud, okay? But it is very simple. A normal person has normal protective feelings toward kids.
right.
They care about kids. A car's coming, they'll go and grab the kid. A predator coming, I didn't even say human predator or
A
animal.
predator coming, they'll grab the kid too.
Okay? And a sexual predator, you really don't like them. Why? Because they have a sense that you're going to change a kid's life, not for the better. You
Right.
sexualize a kid, you change the course of that kid's life. How do I know? I do therapy all the time. Forget pedophiles. I'll give you a classic example for an adult. One of the books that took the world by storm, aside from the Bible, unfortunately, was Harry Potter. But then there was another one. It came out on Valentine's Day, the movie. Anybody remember this? And
He said that's unconstitutional. Let's debate live, which you would gladly do.
You know what? But talk to the other person. Those days are over. If you want to, you can pay me, and I'm not just going to donate my time anymore to you guys. Other than this, now, Hugh, let me ask. No, you stand put, Hugh. I'm going to talk to the other folks, and I'll get back to you. Okay. A normal person will have normal reactions. Euler, are you saying bell-shaped curve? You're outside the curve. You're abnormal or deviant. Okay. If you're into deviant stuff, you're outside the norm. Sorry. There's normal reactions. You talk to a normal adult and you say this, there's a shark in the water. A normal adult will say, oh my gosh, really? And you will see concern, and they'll not let the kids go. They'll want to know more about the person that may know something about sharks. They won't say, screw you. Who are you, Sheriff Brody? I don't even know you. Who do you think you are? That's your opinion. They'll naturally want to learn more by someone or from someone who may know a thing or two. The natural reaction, this is so important for anybody that's listening. The normal reaction, think about your own reaction. If somebody told you, I can give you a profile of a predator that I was in no way aware of, but you might want to be aware of it because they could groom and they could be targeting your kid. A normal person is going to say this, especially if I say I worked with them for 11 years in the Department of Corrections in solitary confinement as well. And I've dealt with about 4,000 of them. A normal person is going to say, wow, tell me. That's normal. If you get anything other than that, we have a concern. And I'll tell you that comes from one of two places. One, I as a parent now am so nervous, I don't know if I want to hear this, so I'm not going to lean in. But what I'm going to say is, I'm going to push back a little bit, but I still want to know. If the knee-jerk reaction or emotional posture is when someone says, I know about predators, I've worked on psych staff for 11 years, certified in the PCLR, I've dealt with about 4,000 predators, headed up one of the state's intensive sex offender units, a normal person's going to want to say, would you tell me how to keep kids safe? A predator's going to do this. Shut your mouth. Who are you? Why? Because that repository of information, and they don't want it to come out. So
did you guys hear what he just said? And I want you to think about this, because as we deal with people on Facebook, as we're out there, who is the group of people right now that are trying to tell everybody to shut up? Who is afraid of having these conversations? Who is the group of people that is afraid to have anything from the CDC or any of these things exposed? Like you just said, John, and can you say that again? Because this is something, and I think everyone needs to hear this again and again and again, because
this is absolutely key, because what you're going to find is this. Normal people will react in a normal way, give or take, all things being, except in a crisis, an earthquake, something like that. They'll tend to go one of two extremes. We understand that. But in a normal situation, we want to know, like if you go to the doctor and the doctor is palpating your tummy and stuff, and all of a sudden he does this, and you go, ow. And if he says this, like when they did my face here, right? Everything was fine. You're saying, oh, you know what, it's just normal stuff. And then the doctor said this, oh, okay, I'm the patient. I don't feel anything. And she said, oh, and ready? I didn't say, shut up. What are you doing? You bigot, you homo. I said,
So it's the ones that are trying to silence people.
There you go.
That's a good way to spot a predator, somebody who's just trying to silence. And on that subject, what do you think about this? Because and John, I'm gonna give you some of what we experience on social media is, when a Christian says something like homosexuality is a sin, or for instance, I did a post recently where I exposed pictures from what's it called, Victoria's Secret, of their first transgender model, and I said, this is what they're trying to do. They're taking men and trying to convince you that they're women. So when men are looking at these photos, they think this is a woman. When in reality, they're finding men attractive, and then they're going to come out and say, "See, it's normal. There's nothing wrong with it," and all that, But when we expose that, we got trolled, and I'm talking probably by 200,000 to 300,000 homosexual supporters. They came on and they literally mobbed us to try to sit there and say, go kill yourself, you should die, homophobe, bigot. They're trying to shut down the conversation. They're trying to shut down that truth. So the people that are doing that, that's a red flag for somebody who is a potential predator, correct?
Absolutely.
Because people that are normal aren't afraid of the truth.
And even more than that, they want to know more. Normal people, right? Normal people know that they don't know everything. If I have someone, let's say I'm digging in my backyard, and someone says, "Oh, yeah, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm doing a trench. I'm putting in sprinklers." And he says, "Oh, you know what? You might want to call the utilities first."
Right.
No, I want to do that because you may hit something, blow up.
Gas line, whatever. Right.
Right. Okay, now the question is, how does a normal person respond? Aside from an idiot, how does a normal person respond?
A normal person would call and say, "Hey, I want to dig this pool here. Can you come out and inspect the yard and make sure there's no gas lines?"
Okay, or let's say you're getting on a plane and somebody looks out the window and says, "Ooh," meaning the plane is filling with passengers, and they say, "Oh, you know what? I'm a structural engineer, and okay." So somebody with what's called a fund of knowledge, not F-U-N, but F-U-N-D, a body of knowledge that he has from either learning or education or something. It could be somebody that's hunted for years, okay? So if somebody with a fund of knowledge conveys concern to the average person, which over issues of concern, a normal person is going to do what? Whoa, stop, tell me more.
What's going on here? What did you just see? What do you want? Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. Because when something,
so
even
if
in my own home, if one of my kids happens to fall, the first thing we do is say, "What happened?" Like you hear a thump, you hear a bang, you turn. What happened? What happened? What was that? Why is somebody crying? What's going on? What happened? You're right. We want to know naturally. We just want to know what.
Especially if it has to do with potential danger.
That's a very good insight.
Right? There's those shows that ice truckers where they're going across.
I hope you guys are taking notes on what he's saying here, because, one of the things I learned about Christianity, and John, you've been doing this, and I think you'd agree with me, is Christians tend to have very short-term memories.
No. And that's what predators count on. As a matter of fact, here's another.
Thank you very much for saying that. That's what predators count on.
Okay, folks, you need to understand this. Predators know us better than we know them. Let me repeat this.
Wow.
Wolves know us better than we know them.
Why do you think that is?
Because they've studied, because they want something. What do they want? They want the sheep. So they watch. Okay, we're to be gentle as doves, but wise as a serpent or a snake. We are to be able to think the way they do. Wow. I'll get to that in a moment.
Just those couple things you said, because I titled this video "How to Spot a Predator," because I thought that was an appropriate title, because that's kind of what we're doing here. When you talk about drag queens, you talk about the prison system, you're talking about what we as a church can do. I mean, that's the basis of your Church Protect Survivor Support, is to help those who were victimized by predators, because maybe they didn't know who the predators were, and we're as a church not equipped to deal with this, because we don't know who they are. I mean, yes, we go out there, we see the drag queen story hours, but like you said in the article, that these people are saying, "I know this is what it looks like, but," and I teach people all the time, the minute you say "but," you literally just negated what you said before the "but."
That's right. A sophisticated predator is simply the equivalent of a cult leader. To understand predators, you have to understand a cult leader. If you understand a cult leader, you understand a predator. Why? Because it's all about, I want something, I'm going after something that's going to be detrimental to you, but I can't let you know it because that would mean I have a firearm, I'm going to put it to your head, I'm going to take it by force. I want something from you, cash or whatever, in this case, sexuality. But it's not even sexuality. I want to violate you. The thing that drives pedophiles is this. I'll give you a heads up and then I'll describe it. It's not even sexuality because they also count on this. They know, a predator knows this because they know us better than we know them. They know that the average person is all about a couple of things. They project on it. We project on the people. We want to give people the benefit of the doubt. And we also know what it's like to wrestle with sin, with passion, with lust. Okay? So when we see someone then wrestling with those issues, even look how I said it, we assume, oh, you know what? They probably don't like doing what they're doing. They probably have a guilty conscience. And so I want to extend grace. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
Okay? But the question is this. Can I discern the difference? And here's where churches especially, but the average person across the board, I find that the average churchgoer and pastor cannot meaningfully describe the difference between, for instance, if I were to give you a marker, a magic marker, and a big whiteboard, and say, I tell you what, chart out for me or describe the difference or plot out for me the difference between a prodigal and a predator. When both say, I'm sorry. How do you discern? Because I tell you what, both will say they're sorry. Both can utter the same words. If you don't think
so,
a predator,
John, so Human came on again. I want to ask you what you think I should do. He says, so you are addressing the problem of pedophilia. You've studied them, and they put studied in them in quotations, with access to more info than researchers with quotations do. Jesus would fix the issue, not demonize victims. So this Human is accusing you of demonizing victims now.
Right. So Hugh and I are going to talk for a moment. Hugh, why are you putting these things in quotes? You don't need to because I'm saying it and it's on tape. So you don't need to put it in quotes because we know what you're doing. You're being sarcastic. So don't do that. The question is this. Hugh, to you, I have a couple of questions. Could it be possible?
Listen to what he says now. If molesters know us better than we do, how do you know about molesters?
Okay, Hugh. Time out for a second.
How does he know about molesters? Do you see what? Yeah. And this is what I like doing, John. Just so you know, on our channel, I like having these people on because people can see them for who they really are, and this is something the world ignores. Right. So you're trying to educate people on how to spot a predator. And again, he doesn't want you talking. So what he wants to do is he wants to paint you as this person to try to shut down the conversation.
But real fast,
to discredit you.
That's right. So Hugh, I'm going to share a little bit. Then why don't you put your keyboard down just for a second? Because I'm really not against you unless you're trying to get at kids. Okay. So it's really simple, Hugh. I have a degree. I've worked in a lot of different places, worked with a lot of survivors, but also worked in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections from 2005 to 2016. Started the nation's first intensive treatment. You heard all that. So it's not debatable because that's what I did. Okay, stay tuned. Next week, I'm going to have a podcast with my former coworker, Mary Louise Seamuth, and then Ken Herdman, who's a treatment specialist. So all of that will be verified for you. So you don't need to put it in quotes. Okay, my life's an open book. Okay, you and a group of you really know, and you've heard, and I've refuted all your little things. Now listen, just relax. 11 years, Department of Corrections, I have a set of keys as a psychology staff, and I can go anywhere. As a matter of fact, we are required to actually get the medical records so that we can do a proper psychosocial, that we can do a proper evaluation. To have guys in sex offender treatment, I actually have to evaluate them. We used the static 99. That was part of my job. I had a roster of guys, whether they were going to be in my group or not. I had to evaluate them. On top of that, a psych staff in the DOC also is on the receiving end of what are called request slips. So if an inmate wants to talk to you. But see, what was unique about me is I earned the reputation of actually listening.
So now he's saying that you haven't proven you know what you're talking about. Tell
I
me
know.
facts, not your
Okay,
history.
that's right. That's right, Hugh. So I tell you what, while you continue to work at the keyboard, I'll continue to present knowledge. Okay. So Hugh, if you would like to share with us your clinical background, let's flip it around, Hugh. Share with me the graduate school that you graduated from. Share with me, now better than this. You know what? Put your bio on your website for either survivors or about predators and give us the name. Share with us right now on your screen as you're whipping through the keyboard. Show us your website right now that's verifiable, and I want your name. And then, you know what? We'll do a podcast with you where people can see your face.
Well,
You're
John,
actually
don't you know
verifiable.
that his liberal arts degree in vagina studies makes him an expert on psychology, human nature, theology, archaeology, history,
Is
geology?
is that what his background is?
I don't know. That's what I always say as a joke because
Yeah.
that's kind. I mean, I literally had a cosmetologist the other day come up to me and tell me that her cosmetology degree trumps my theology degree.
Okay, but here, so aware of the time. So some people may
No,
have
no,
to.
don't worry about the time. Just
But I
my
want-
audience is well aware. It's okay.
Okay, but a couple of things became clear over time. Now, again, I'm sitting down, I'm starting the working with sex offenders, assuming from my training and my own bent that to abuse a child, you have to have been abused. And so I'm giving them that benefit of the doubt. But as I'm beginning to ask them more questions of pedophiles, they weren't responding like survivors would. Well, I'm steeped in survivors. And I'm starting to think, wait a second, if you're a survivor, you wouldn't have responded.
No,
that way.
I'm laughing because you're not seeing these comments. Somebody says Hugh has his pants around his ankles.
Perfect. Hugh, well, you know what? That's probably the best position you could be in, Hugh.
I don't have any degrees. I just have common sense.
Yes, I'm sure you do, Hugh.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I know, I know. So, but one of the things that I started hearing from, especially the pedophiles. Now, again, I hate to say it like this, but the run-of-the-mill sex offender. And for
No,
those,
you know,
who
well,
haven't dealt with
somebody just said here they were giving too much attention to Hugh. He's taking valuable time away from what you're trying to teach. So
Okay,
I'm
so
gonna
here we go.
I'm gonna mute him, like you said. I'm not gonna block him, but I'm gonna mute him so that you can continue. How do we spot a predator? A drag queen story, or all these things here. And I
But Hugh has shared in this sense. If you have somebody like Hugh, that's like this little chihuahua, that's a huge red flag. For instance, my background, training, and experience versus Hugh's. Why is Hugh coming at me? Hugh should be what? Like the average person saying, "You stop talking to him. I want to."
That's a good.
So you watch a person's reaction. If they don't want more from somebody that's knowledgeable, there's a reason why they're trying to distract and shut it down. And it's exactly parallel to when we see people coming out of a cult such as Scientology. And you watch how the cult leaders will, if they're interviewed and somebody has gotten out of the cult, and now the interviewer starts to sit down with maybe the cult leader is going to trash the person's reputation that left. They're going to start to paint the person as knowing nothing, meaning the person that left, you watch and listen to how the cult leader speaks about the person that got out of the cult. And it's going to be identical to like a Hugh or these kind of people. So the average person wants to know more. So here's what I finally discovered, because I started hearing this phrase. Well, Mr. Euler, you know what happened was hurt people hurt people. And a couple times I let that go by. And then I finally asked them, what do you mean by that? And they said, well, we were hurt. And so then we ended up just hurting other people. I said, really? Well, if you've worked with survivors, you know that's BS. In what way? Okay. If you have been hurt, if somebody has negatively impacted you, you know what that feels like. And so the question is this: why would you presume to do to someone else and inflict that kind of pain and trauma on someone that was done to you? No. A genuine survivor becomes overly caring and overly protective about those that are around them. So what's one characteristic of a genuine survivor? Hypervigilance, hyperprotectiveness of kids. We call them sometimes helicopter parents. Mm-hmm. Okay, so intuitively, a true survivor is never going to perpetrate. Now, what they'll say is, oh, nobody's, okay. Everybody understands what it's like to have a bad day. Everybody understands what it's like to have low blood sugar. You come home, you're just tired, okay? But that's to be human.
Right.
But if I have a bad day, it doesn't mean I come home and I whip my pants off and I rape somebody, okay? But the perpetrators will do this. Again, they know we want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And so the missing link. So number one, they will say things assuming that we're going to try to figure out, well, if I were to do that, what would have gone on? But you're not. And that's part of the whole issue of psychopathy, and we'll describe that as well too. But here's the other missing piece that was never touched in the curriculum, and none of the inmates, especially the pedophiles, none of them ever brought this up: the use of porn. And so, I mean, years went by, and all of a sudden it occurred to me, I thought, wait a second. Every single sex offender, pedophile or not, but every single sex offender was deeply steeped in porn by the time they're busted, 100%. With the pedophiles, 100% are arrested for child porn. Now, you doubt that, just do a Google search. Keep searching and find one. There may be one out there, I would doubt it, but find one story of a pedophile that's busted that's not found with child porn on his devices. You won't find it. How do I know? Because as I was looking through all these files, about 1,000 pedophile files over 11 years, I started to notice everyone. And then I noticed purposely, it's like, wait a second. And so every single one of them, not my phobia, not my bias, that was something important to figure out, because now it starts to make sense, because we were being told, oh, they were perped on. No, because they're not responding like survivors do. So that went out the door. Well, how did that myth get started? Through research. The pedophile sitting down with a researcher who either wants to put this myth or not, who may be naive. And the pedophile can say this: well, you know what? I was molested as a kid. You were? Okay. And now they write that down. Now the question is this: did it really happen? Euler, I thought we were to believe it. No, the question is this: did it happen? Can some people actually make up those stories? Yeah. Well, how can you discern? If you know what you're talking about, then you can discern it.
Oh, here we go. So you've looked at thousands of pictures of child porn. That's not what you said.
Okay, Hugh, you know what? Take a time.
That's not Hugh. That's somebody else now.
Okay.
That was...
yeah, folks, and I'll say it again.
But that's not what you said. You saw the files of people that did. Not
right.
that you
and
did.
That's right. And so in the police, so I get every single time, as a matter of fact, I would bring into the sex offender treatment kind of like this.
But you see, now that you said before that people that are a potential red flag for somebody who could be a predator, now that you said that, when you see people like this and they're just literally trying to shut down the conversation, it kind of changes how you look at things now.
There you go. Because it's like this.
It really does.
That's right. So it's like this. I'm starting to bring up information. Let's pretend this bottle contains information. So I'm bringing this up. A normal person's going to want to say, oh, you'll read the ingredients. Tell me more about this. If you have somebody that does this, you'll put that down. You'll shut up. Where'd you get that? The question is, what's up with that? A normal person wants to know, A, how to protect kids, B, what's the nature of predators? And of course, and it's legitimate, what's your background? If I couldn't produce anything like you, I can be dismissed. But if you find out, wow, 11 years in the Department of Corrections, Pennsylvania, certified in the PCLR, you might know, headed up one of the intensive treatment programs. You might know a little bit, could spend endless time, especially with guys long-term military. Hannibal Lecter's, you think about the movie Silence of the Lamb. What part of that was compelling? That Jodie Foster.
Hold on one second, John. I might have to restart. It looks like I'm frozen, and they're telling me that you are lagging really bad.
Oh, okay.
So I might have to restart. I can't watch TV.